are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers.
If you've got this gut-wrenching feeling that something big is about to happen, there's a reason. And it has everything to do with what is now being disclosed to the general public.
Bombshell UFO report is expected in June from the U.S. government.
Meantime, UFO sightings in New York have nearly doubled since the pandemic began, and we are getting new video from the Navy showing pyramid-shaped objects flying in the sky.
We were warned by the late Wernher von Braun in the years leading up to his death in 1977 that there were going to be a certain number of cards played on humanity, all leading to a culminating event. Now, everything Wernher von Braun warned us about has come true, except for what he called the final card that they were going to play on us, and it has everything to do with UFOs.
The strategy that Wernher von Braun taught me was that first the Russians are going to be considered to be the enemy. In fact, when I met him in '74, they were the enemy. Then terrorists would be identified, and that was soon to follow. We heard a lot about terrorism. Then we were going to identify third world country crazies. We now call them nations of concern. But he said that would be the third enemy against whom we would be needing to build space-based weapons. And the next enemy was asteroids.
This new one you're tracking, how big?
It's what we call a global killer. Nothing would survive, not even bacteria.
An asteroid some scientists call a city killer came closer to Earth than the moon this week. The scary thing is that scientists had no idea it was coming.
Now at this point, he kind of chuckled the first time he said it. Asteroids, against asteroids we're going to build space-based weapons. So it was funny then. And the funniest one of all was against what he called aliens, extraterrestrials. That would be the final card. And over and over and over during the 4 years that I knew him and was giving his speeches for him, he would bring up that last card. And remember, Carol, the last card is the alien card. We're going to have to build space-based weapons against aliens. And all of it, he said, is a lie. The way he said it to me, there was no doubt in my mind that he knew something that he was too afraid to talk about.
Can you tell us, have unidentified flying objects been seen?
Well, sure. We have lots of reports about what we call unidentified aerial phenomenon.
Just a few days ago, the Pentagon confirmed that a 2019 video of a UFO sighting is actually real. It was a UFO.
Very importantly, I'm hereby directing the Department of Defense and Pentagon to immediately begin the process necessary to establish a Space Force as the 6th branch of the armed forces. That's a big statement.
Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
They've done a great job systematically programming each one of us into believing that this alien threat is very real and very near. But what they don't want us to realize is what ancient accounts actually say about these beings. Now, the idea that ancient aliens encountered mankind is very popular today. We've all seen these accounts of aliens bringing us great technologies and sharing all these secrets with us. But what they want you to forget is the actual origin of these ancient alien stories. They were never considered to be from outer space. They were considered to be fallen angels.
Could we reinterpret the story of fallen angels as beings not from heaven, but from Mars?
Accounts dating back thousands of years depict an angelic race of people coming down and sharing their technologies and their ideas with mankind, even producing offspring. But they want us to forget that and replace it with this idea of ancient aliens from space. And they have to, because that's the only way this deception is going to work, is if we don't understand what's going on. Now, if we look back at the origin of the modern alien abduction era, we'll see that it has a very demonic undertone.
And look at this character right here, Aleister Crowley. He's out there in January through March of 1918 doing a series of magical experiments called the Emelantra workings, in which he is said to have opened a portal to another dimension, allowing an entity, I believe a demon, named Lamb, to enter through it. Now, this is the drawing that he made in 1918 of this character that he apparently had some interaction with. You know, if you look at this picture, it's curiously similar to something we might call an alien gray today in pop culture. So, you know, it doesn't take a whole lot of research on this character to realize he was into some really, really dark stuff. So why did I bring this up? This is, 1918 time frame. Well, you have this character who's very much a part of the early space program, Jack Parsons, who was basically a disciple, practically an heir apparent to Crowley and all of his activities. Well, supposedly, Crowley's portal was further enlarged by Jet Propulsion Laboratory founder and rocket fuel scientist Jack Parsons. Okay, this is the guy who was one of the founding members of JPL. It was a big part of NASA and the space program. And he's out there with Scientology and Dianetics founder L. Ron Hubbard in March of 1946 at a location that later became known as Area 51. They're doing all kinds of ceremonial sex magic, and they called it the Babylon working. And it's very similar to the Emelantra working, based on ceremonial sex magic. But unlike Crowley, however, they were not as adept at opening and closing portals, and theirs apparently stayed open, and the modern UFO era began 1 year later, in 1947, the same year Crowley died. So, this is all going on about the same time you've got Admiral Byrd going down there for Operation High Jump. And a decade later, we got the founding of NASA. And these are the characters, okay? Freemasons, Nazis, and occultists creating the space program.
What we're thinking of as aliens are they're extra-dimensional beings that an earlier precursor of the space program made contact with. They are not what they claim to be. They have infiltrated a lot of aspects of the military establishment, particularly the Area 51.
I remember the conversation very well. This is a person I respected tremendously, very, very senior person. He's told me, he said, "Lou, I want you to stop doing this." I said, "Okay, sir, I certainly can, but may I ask why?" And he says, "Well, we already know what it is." Now, at that moment, I honestly thought maybe it was our own technology. I was running up against some super uber secret sap, and they were telling me to stop. And I said, "Okay, sir, so it's ours?" And he said, "No, that's not what I'm saying." And he said, he asked me point blank, "Have you read your Bible lately?" And I wasn't quite sure where he was going with that. And I said, "Well, sir, I think I know what it says. Where are you going with this?" And he said, "Well, then you would know that these things are demonic, and we should not be pursuing them." Yeah, and he wasn't kidding. That's exactly how he felt.
So this is a Pentagon. This is a Department of Defense official. Saying, stop looking at UFOs because they're demonic?
Correct.
Before we can actually fully appreciate just how big this deception is going to be, we have to uncover the underlying deception, the one that puts this whole thing to rest. We all grew up believing the story that we were told, that Earth is just a speck of dust in an infinite universe, that there are other Earth-like galaxies out there and planets far, far away, and aliens could come visit us one day. But think back to the origin of that reality. It was told to us by people that we know and trust. Our teachers, our parents, everything we saw on television supported this narrative. But what if we were actually at the center of the universe in a very unique place? And that brings us back to what every ancient cosmology understood about the skies that they were seeing above. They were not told what to believe. They were going out and they were mapping out the skies. And every one of them came to the conclusion that these stars that were rotating above our heads were making their own orbits in a fixed way. They believed that the heavens above were unchanging. Now, they also believed the Earth wasn't spinning or moving. They believed it to be perfectly still. And if we go back to the Genesis accounts, we start to see that they had this idea that there was a vast solid covering known as the firmament. It was the second day of creation. That's when it was made. The entire second day was spent making this solid covering, and that's where the stars were said to be placed. And other ancient cosmologies outside the Bible had the same understanding that the stars were fixed and they would all continue to make the same predictable paths for thousands and thousands of years. Many of their ancient structures were built specifically to line up with constellations. And thousands of years later, here we are seeing these same structures line up with the constellations they lined up with when they were built. They were using the sky as this great timepiece above to keep track of the days, the weeks, the months, the years. And that's how they understood things to work. That the Earth was relatively flat, stationary, with a fixed, solid covering. Okay, now we were all taught in school that Christopher Columbus sailed in this big circle, and that proved once and for all that we live on a globe. But ancient maps, even after Columbus sailed his big circle, still showed that the Earth was flat and stationary, with Antarctica being the edge. And what we all considered as settled science, that hundreds of years we've just known that the Earth was a ball in infinite space, it was a highly debated issue until very recent history. And they were actually teaching the Earth was flat in schools as recently as the 1920s.
We were just talking, and I asked you what shape the Earth is, and what did you say? What were you taught in school in elementary school? I was taught in school that the Earth was flat.
And the first person to ever venture far enough up to see what the Earth looked like was a guy named Auguste Piccard. Most of us have never heard of this person because when he made it to the stratosphere, he said he saw what appeared to be a flat disk with an upturned edge. Now, after Auguste Piccard ventured to the stratosphere, we have the U.S. Air Force showing us the stars from space for the very first time. And when you look at what they showed us, what they actually saw, you begin to understand why the moon landings never had stars in the background, why they're not showing us stars from space anymore, because it's very difficult to pull this off.
The sky is deep black.
As you can see the stars.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and pretty much all the time you can see the stars.
The sky, of course, was black.
The heavens are 10 times as bright, stars 10 times as numerous.
And we could not see stars.
The thing about Carl Sagan, billions of billions is that there really are billions and billions of stars, and you can see them.
It's an unfathomable blackness, like texture you feel like you could stick your hand into.
And that's when things start to get weird, because people have gone back and looked at declassified documents that for some reason keep mentioning a flat, non-rotating Earth. Over and over again, it's in their flight plans, it's in all their working models. This flat, stationary Earth repetitively keeps showing up. If it doesn't exist, there'd be absolutely no reason to base all of your science on it. Something else shows up. In the 50s, in Russia, they had documents describing the firmament.
Deals. It's a long fly ball going back, and the ball shatters the sky, bringing the ocean itself down into the stadium. Oh, Simpson just broke this dream's reality wide open.
And we take for granted our entire view of the universe hinges upon the Apollo moon missions. It was actually the first time we ever saw our planet as a whole, and somebody confirmed to us what we're being taught is actually real.
We found a very unique reel of footage.
And you want me to see this while you have me on camera?
Well, and to tell us what it is.
An old reel received by mistake. It contains the raw or unedited footage of the crew of Apollo 11, Michael Collins, Edwin Aldrin Jr., and Neil Armstrong, staging part of their mission for nearly an hour.
I think when you see the footage, you'll see that it's very extraordinary, one of a kind, behind the scenes type of footage.
Yeah. Well, if it is, why do you have access to something that no one else has seen before?
Serendipity, I guess.
Though the federal government would have you believe that this is a view of Earth from a distance out of the spacecraft's window as it nears the moon, it is not. What they have ingeniously done is placed the camera at the back of the spacecraft and centered the lens on a circular window in the foreground.
Turn the camera on, please.
As they perfected the shot, a crescent-shaped piece of black material was inset slightly into the window to create the illusion of the Earth's terminator line dividing night and day. It is uncannily convincing.
If you show this publicly, you're open for a lawsuit.
Here is the diffused work light that they used to see camera controls, but not throw light onto the spacecraft's wall. Finally, the iris is opened up, and you can see the real location of the camera, and the very bright and near Earth out the window.
You're talking to the wrong guy. Why don't you talk to the administrator at NASA? We're passengers. We're guys going on a flight.
Now maybe we could say they faked the moon landings. But what about every single space agency after this? We're putting our trust in people to be honest and show us exactly what they're seeing. They would have no reason to lie about going to space, being on a space station. But that's where things start to get even weirder, because we're catching them making big mistakes. They're having CGI glitches. Their wire harnesses are not working correctly. If you do enough searching, you will find clip after clip of NASA fails. These people messing up in the middle of what's supposed to be a live feed, because even with the best technology, things screw up.
So many times during spacewalks outside the International Space Station, we can see air bubbles rising up. Can you touch on how there are air bubbles in space?
Can you be more specific? Air bubbles?
So yeah, like a lot of times during the footage, the NASA footage, you can see bubbles coming up out of the helmets or kind of from underneath you. How do you explain bubbles in space?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about. Now sometimes you get water in the helmet, and it's either from sweat or from the cooling garments. And in some of my spacewalks, I had like water in the helmet, not like I was going to drown in the helmet, but just little bits of water probably came from sweat. Often on the outside of the space station, you'll liberate little pieces of it's a really harsh environment out there, and the outside of the space station gets beat up pretty good. And sometimes, you'll see just little flecks of paint or something that you might have disrupted floating away from the suit. And, that's generally what that is. I've never seen any kind of air bubble anywhere.
Yeah. Could it be that you're filming in an underwater pool and you're not really out there?
Now, you and I could put this whole thing to rest ourselves by going to space. Civilians could go to space. They've been promising us this for years. We can just take a rocket and go to space, right? They are working on it as we speak.
In a year's time, in the last few months. Early next year, very few months. Sometime next year. By the end of the year, we should be taking members of the public into space.
By the mid-2030s.
By 2020.
Early in the next decade.
Before 2023.
And by 2025.
Most certainly in our lifetime.
That's 2024.
We should have a permanently occupied human base on the moon and send people to Mars.
It's going to grow old if we don't start flying next year.
We'll return Americans to the moon for the first time since 1972, if you can believe that.
With our hopes of ever going to space continually burning to the ground, we're left with no other option but to take the pictures of Earth that NASA gives us.
I don't want to fool you here. Last month, for the first time since 1972, NASA released The blue marble, the single snapshot of the Earth taken from outer space.
NASA's Rob Simon made this, and it had wide appeal too. For example, it ended up as the default background on the iPhone.
I didn't even know until I bought an iPhone and turned it on and kind of did a little happy dance.
Simon's job is...
It's primarily taking data and making pictures out of it.
That's what this is, a composite of data sets from several different instruments translated into a picture.
The single snapshot of the Earth taken from outer space.
To us, the really cool thing was the data set. Up until that point, there was no realistic color map of the globe anywhere.
There's artistry to creating the world.
What I imagine it to be. Unfortunately, I'm not an astronaut. I've never been to space. But I've looked at these images over and over again, trying to sort of get the essence of it. It is photoshopped, but it has to be.
The only time we ever see curvature from any high-altitude balloons or anything that was sent up, it's created using a fisheye wide-angle lens effect. We saw this during the Red Bull jump. Anytime they send up something on television, you're going to see this curved horizon, but it's the result of this wide-angle lens. If you send up a non-fisheye lens to the highest height, no matter how high you go, horizon always rises to your eye level, and it's always perfectly flat. We could also go to satellite footage. After all, aren't there thousands of satellites orbiting the Earth right now? One would think. And yes, there are in fact satellites being sent up year after year. There have been for decades. The only problem is these satellites are launched on balloons, and they have been falling down all over the world.
For a Michigan couple when a satellite crash landed in their backyard, and their reaction? Priceless.
You never know what's going to happen. This baby fell out of the sky and landed in our yard.
Houston, we've had a problem here.
Forget it, Bart. It's so bright out you can't see anything in the sky except the Fox satellite.